If you're starting a nonprofit right now, or you started one in the last few years, there's a good chance you're building a board of directors based on what used to work, but maybe not what nonprofits actually need in a rapidly changing 2026 environment. Nonprofit boards today need different skills than they did even 5 or 10 years ago. And a lot of nonprofit founders and leaders are feeling that skill gap on their boards, even if they can't quite name it yet. So as I've worked with my own organization's board, served on other boards, and advised other nonprofit leaders, I've watched how boards can either help organizations adapt to big changes like we're seeing today, or inadvertently hold them back. So by the end of this video, you'll understand more about which board roles and skills matter most in our current 2026 context, depending on your organization's stage. And I'll also share a few tips on where to realistically find people with those skills today. So real quick, some important context that you're going to need here before we talk about specific skills for your board. I just want to clarify something important. Boards don't look the same at every stage of an organization, and they're not supposed to. One of the biggest mistakes that I see is nonprofit leaders trying to recruit board of directors members without first assessing what kind of board do we actually need right now, and what kinds of skills do we need to meet our organization's goals in the next 1 to 3 years. In reality, there are 2 phases that most organizations move through when it comes to their board of directors. So early on, you're going to have what's called a working board. This board acts like staff and manages everything that needs to get done in the organization, from operations to programs. But later, as the organization hires dedicated staff to take on the day-to-day work and your systems mature, that board is going to evolve into what's often called a governing board. Neither is better or worse, they just serve different needs at different times. So that governing board is going to be a lot more focused on high-level, longer-term strategy, policy, and oversight of the executive director. So let's start with the board roles and skills that you need for working boards in startup and growing organizations, because I would wager that is where many of you are who are watching this video right now. So as I mentioned before, these working board members aren't just advising from a distance. They're actively involved in getting things done, because at this stage, the nonprofit usually doesn't have dedicated staff yet. So these board members might be helping with everything from planning events to drafting donor emails to building partnerships to troubleshooting technology or systems, or even stepping in to run a program when capacity is thin. And that's totally normal for this stage of the organization. So if you're a founder thinking, I need board members who will actually show up and help, you're not wrong at all. That's what this stage is all about. The key question is how they're helping and whether their skills actually match what your organization needs in this phase. And in a 2026 context, working boards especially benefit from a few specific skill areas. First, you need strong communicators and what I like to call community connectors. These are the people who are comfortable explaining the mission, making introductions to strangers, inviting others into the work, and sometimes just having a lot of small conversations that build momentum over time. For example, this might look like a board member who's happy to speak at a local Rotary Club, or set up coffee meetings with potential sponsors, or help the founder think through how to talk about the work in a way that maybe resonates with different audiences. Second, you need someone with project management skills, and this one is actually hugely underrated. Let me know if you've experienced this. Early stage boards who are often great at ideas and enthusiasm, but can be much weaker at follow through. That is why someone with project management experience or skills, who naturally thinks in timelines and next steps and accountability, this person can help transform how effective a board feels. That might be the person who says, okay, what's the actual next step here and who's going to own it? And then follow up 2 weeks later. Third, you need people with either fundraising or like a sales adjacent experience. And to clarify, when I say sales and some of the stereotypes around that, this is not about having board members who are like pushy or transactional. That's the opposite of what your organization needs. Rather, it's about having someone on your board who understands how people make decisions on what to support or invest in, especially in today's crowded, uncertain funding environment. This is really important. Someone with this background can help the board think through more clearly about who they're talking to, why those people might care, and how to build relationships over time instead of chasing one-off wins or donations. That long-term relationship building is key here. According to the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, donor retention continues to be one of the biggest challenges that nonprofits face, especially at early stages. But if you have a board that can help your organization build relationships and trust early, you can set your organization up for stable revenue and support later. Fourth, and this is increasingly important, you do need someone with basic literacy around technology, AI, and data protection. This doesn't mean you need a cybersecurity expert on your board, though that couldn't hurt, but having someone who understands risks, asks smart questions, and helps the organization think responsibly about donor data, volunteer data, and client information is really essential today because nonprofits are among the biggest victims of cyber attacks right now. And finally, if you can recruit at least one person with prior nonprofit board experience, this is going to be a huge gift to you. That person brings experience that will give your board a huge leg up because they know standard board processes and procedures right off the bat. They've likely been on board committees or seen agendas or bylaws and seen board member transitions, and they can help you avoid reinventing the wheel in a phase where you already have a lot going on. So this can save you months of trying to figure out this stuff from scratch. All right, so let's talk about, as your organization's growing, what you need as it evolves to a governing board instead of this working board that's in the weeds of everything. So like I said, as organizations grow, boards are meant to change and evolve. Once you have staff handling most of the day-to-day work, the board's role shifts towards that governance piece. That usually means focusing on, like I said, strategy, financial health, executive leadership support, and long-term mission protection while staying out of the operational weeds. And especially in a 2026 landscape, governing boards still need strong communications and ambassador roles because board members are often the public face of the organization, expected to spend time making connections and raising general awareness about the organization. But there are a few additional skill areas that really stand out for governing boards right now. And the first is change management skills. Nonprofits today are operating in a period of constant adjustment. Funding sources are shifting, policies are changing, community needs are increasing and evolving, and sometimes whole strategies need to be revisited. According to the BDO's 2025 Nonprofit Standards Benchmarking Report, 88% of nonprofits right now are looking at shifting their mission scopes and programming due to shifting community needs and other factors. So board members with change management experience are critical for helping leadership slow down, prioritize, and make thoughtful transitions instead of reacting out of fear or urgency, which can have a negative impact on your overall mission. Second, and this is related but different, but governing boards need people with crisis response skills. This doesn't mean expecting everything to go wrong, but it does mean having people at the table who can stay steady when something unexpected happens, whether that's a funding disruption or a leadership transition or an issue the organization needs to publicly respond to. Boards that can support leadership calmly through tough moments make a huge difference in whether organizations recover or spiral. And third, governing boards need financial forecasting and scenario planning skills. This goes beyond reading monthly financial reports. It's about asking questions like, what happens if this grant doesn't renew? How long is our runway if costs increase? And what are we assuming will stay stable that might not? Research from Bridgespan points out that the most effective, high-performing nonprofit boards excel at this long-term strategic thinking. So boards who engage in forward-looking financial oversight, not just approval of past numbers, are better positioned to guide organizations through today's level of uncertainty. So before we move on to where to recruit board members with all these skills, I do want to talk about a few of the roles and skills that all nonprofit boards need, and that's your board officers. Generally speaking, if you're not familiar with this, in most regions, all nonprofit boards are legally required to have officers. These are positions elected by the rest of your board according to your own nonprofit bylaws. They usually include at least a chair, a board secretary, a treasurer, and often includes a vice chair too. So very briefly, here's what those roles actually look like in practice and what skills they require to do them effectively. The board chair is essentially the bridge between the rest of the board and the executive director, and this is a really important role. They help set agendas, they guide conversations, they manage dynamics in the room, and keep the board focused on its role. That all means that a strong chair needs to be someone who's diplomatic, emotionally steady, and willing to put the organization's needs above their own preferences. They're not there to run the organization. That's the executive director's job. But they are meant to be a partner to the executive director and help the board function well. Now, the vice chair supports the chair and provides continuity, and this role is especially important for succession and stability, even if it feels quieter day to day. So the vice chair will need to step in if the chair is absent, so they need some similar skills to what I just said for the chair, especially in running meetings efficiently and ensuring everyone's voices are heard. Now, the secretary keeps official records, including meeting minutes. This doesn't require technical expertise, especially with modern AI tools that can help with transcription, but it does require good judgment. Knowing what belongs in official records and what doesn't matters because board minutes can be requested by the IRS or other entities. So this person has to know how to stay in compliance with IRS documentation rules while also being discerning. And the treasurer oversees financial reporting and stewardship. Ideally, this is someone with a financial or accounting background, though transparently, those candidates can be really hard to recruit since they are in such high demand. So at minimum, it needs to be someone who's comfortable with numbers, curious, and willing to learn. In reality, treasurers often play a key role in helping boards understand the story behind the numbers, not just the numbers themselves. In a moment, I'm going to talk you through some places that you can look to recruit and connect with potential board candidates. But first, let's thank our sponsor. Starting and growing a nonprofit can feel overwhelming, but when it comes to collecting donations online, you don't need to wait until you're big to get the right tools in place. Click and Pledge makes it easy for new and growing nonprofits to start strong and scale with confidence. With Click and Pledge, you're going to get professional grade tools for super affordable startup level costs from day one. They've got customizable donation forms that you can plug right into your website to form the foundation of your strong online fundraising strategy. And Click and Pledge also has a number of other tools included in their affordable flat monthly costs that you can use as your nonprofit grows, such as in-person and peer-to-peer fundraising features, video fundraising with embedded donation links, text to give tools, donor management, Salesforce, and other integrations, all included with no contracts or surprise add-on fees. Unlike some platforms that increase your fees as you grow, Click and Pledge pricing stays the same whether you have 10 donors or 10,000 donors. Use the QR code and link in the description to check out Click and Pledge, book a demo, and get your first $25 monthly fee waived. All right, so where do you actually find people with these skills? First, I'll say don't overlook your existing community. Your volunteers, your donors, your program participants, and longtime supporters often make some of the strongest board members because they already understand and care about your mission. Second, your local volunteer center can be a really great resource, and many are connected through national networks. For example, you might use idealist.org, which lets you post your board volunteer needs, but you can also connect to your local Points of Light chapter. These are organizations in cities around the world that help nonprofits find volunteers, and that can include board members. Now, for board-specific matching, there are also national platforms like BoardSource, which offers education and sometimes regional connections, or even LinkedIn, especially when you're clear about the specific skills that you're seeking rather than just a title for the board. You can post a board need as a special volunteer role on LinkedIn. And offline, don't underestimate your chambers of commerce, your business networking groups, or your professional associations. And finally, this one is often overlooked, but other nonprofits are a good resource. It's not about competing or poaching for board members. The reality is board members often cycle off after completing a term and are actively looking for their next place to serve. So you'd be surprised at how many other organizations might be willing to recommend candidates for you. So real quick, I'm curious if you want to share in the comments, where are you in this process? Which of these skills feels like it's going to be the hardest for you to find right now for your board? At the end of the day, here's the big idea I want you to leave with. Strong nonprofit boards in 2026 aren't defined by the titles or the prestige. They're defined by good fit between the organization's current stage, its current challenges, and the skills sitting around your table. When you stop asking who looks impressive on our board and start asking, what do we actually need right now? Everything gets a lot clearer. So if you're starting or even rebuilding your nonprofit's board, you don't need to get this perfect. You just need to get it to be intentional. So here's one practical thing you can try right now. Go write down 3 skills that your organization most needs in the next 12 months and let that list guide your board recruiting. And if you want additional tips and support, I share weekly insights and practical tools in my free newsletter for nonprofit leaders and changemakers. It's linked below and also on my website, changemakercafe.com. In the next video, we'll talk about a big challenge that many organizations face: recruiting volunteers, especially today. I'll share some of the top strategies for recruiting the volunteers you need for your organization this year. I'm Amber Melanie Smith, and I'll see you next week. Bye.